Jen Hampton from the Asheville Food and Beverage United. Jen, thank you so much for joining us on the show. We're happy to have you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. This is a unique opportunity to talk about food and beverage workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited because I just saw there was a new news article about the work you're doing in the Citizen Times. There has been a lot of movement and kind of energy around this recently. But I think it'd be good for us to start out a little more broadly. A lot of us know that our economy we've heard this all the time, right? That our economy has moved from a manufacturing economy to a service worker economy. And more people in the workforce are doing service work jobs. I'm wondering, have you done service work yourself? How did this become a passion for you?
Yeah, I have worked in the service industry for 31 years, 17 of those years right here in Asheville in various restaurants and cafes. So I have a lot of experience up until just earlier this year working in restaurants and cafes. And it became a passion for me because basically during the pandemic I started seeing that all of the issues I had internalized as my own fault, I had made this decision or that choice or, whatever, that led to low wages and no health care and all that stuff. I thought that was all my fault, but when I started talking to other workers, I realized that it was systemic and that we were all facing these issues, and that really fired me up to want to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. What is it like you've been in the business, you've been in that industry for so long. What is it actually like day to day when it comes to either the work that's being done, the way that you kind of interact with your bosses or your clients and customers, or I guess on the we can get into the pay side of things. There's a lot of things we could talk about, but I guess what stands out to you as most kind of indicative of the experience of working in the service industry?
I've thought a lot about that, so I'm glad you asked me that question. There's this really strong tie in the community of especially food service workers and other like retail and stuff where you deal with customers, because something happens in the interactions with people when it's a customer and service provider interaction. And we get to see as service workers a different side of people. We get to see them in their downtime, when they're not in their professional setting, and it's just a really interesting kind of insight and perspective on a different side of society, basically. And since we all deal with it, there's a sense of camaraderie, like, we've been in the battlefield together, because we've seen some stuff, we've heard some stuff, and, it's just like, wow, and so you don't really understand it unless you've been through it, and, it really fosters a sense of community. Yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. And it also depends on like where and what your customer base is, and you want to have like genuine interactions with customers, but you have to put up this wall. You have to put on this face, your customer service face, your customer service voice, because so much of your personality and the way you present yourself, especially for people who get tips, you're dependent on people responding well to those interactions for your living. So it's also that kind of power dynamic where you understand that they have the power, the customer does, because if they're not happy with the service you provide or the smiles that you give, then you don't get paid, basically.
Yeah, I was only in restaurants for maybe 6-8 months, but I definitely remember that being the case. And I remember a good friend and mentor of mine later in life who he started as a busboy, worked his way up to GM of a corporate chain, and I remember he said that it always felt like that in that work you are kind of the front line, and you are working with people who a lot of times they sort of feel hopeless and powerless sometimes in their own lives, and they feel like they've maybe been sort of talked down to or treated poorly in a certain way by either their boss or by something else. And so he's like, you're interacting with the people the one time where they kind of feel like they have a little bit of power, and so he always just suggested that we keep that in mind in in doing the work. We had on Amanda Claypool back last summer, and she had a fascinating story where she went ahead and she actually took a job. She's a writer and a consultant, and she had heard so much about this talk about the lack of workers, that there was a labor shortage. And so she wanted to find out kind of what it was about, and she went ahead and took a job waiting tables at Waffle House. She said it could have been any corporate chain she could have taken. It would have been about the same experience, but that was where she ended up. And she talked about just the economics and kind of just how much she really broke down the details of what it actually costs to be a worker and what it costs to work for tips. Could you speak a little bit about that, about the experience of service workers and who are full-time doing this as their full-time work, but are working based on that tipped income?
Yeah, it can be taxing emotionally because you're always having to present this fake self, and just kind of take whatever people say to you and just kind of let it try to wash over you because you can't react, so you do have to just keep a smile on and just internalize those things. So it can be really stressful. I remember thinking many times that it didn't feel good to be selling my smiles, basically. And after my last job working in Biltmore Village at a bakery there, or my last front of the house job, I should say, I just vowed that I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was just too much. And the stress of it is that you never know, even if you give your best service to people, they may not tip, or they may not tip adequately, and you can end up having to actually pay to be serving them, because if they don't tip you at least 20%, then you're still getting taxed on what 20% of your sales would be, so you're actually losing money sometimes. So it was just a constant struggle, and then if you don't get tipped well, I would internalize it and feel like I was a bad person, that I wasn't nice enough, that I did something wrong, and, just that really stands out to me as what affected me the most as a front of the house tipped worker, was just having to rely on that system as my source of income and feeling pretty powerless for that reason.
Yeah, because tipped workers in most states, at least, and that's changing here and there. I just saw that the city of Chicago changed their tipped worker minimum wage to $15. I've seen that happening here and there, but in a lot of states, we think of people making an income, but the actual what they're actually getting paid from the restaurant a lot of times is just a couple dollars an hour. Is that right?
Yep, that's absolutely right. When I first started working as a waitress, as we called them back then, in 1992, I was making $2.03 an hour. And now people are making $2.13 an hour, 30 years later. So it hasn't really changed, in any substantial way. And many times you don't even get a paycheck because all of that money goes to taxes. I've even gotten a negative paycheck at times where, I would owe the company money because of the taxes that I had to pay on my tips.
Yeah. What I guess it kind of baffles me sometimes the way that we think about certain types of work as being more worthy of a living wage than others.
Yep.
David Graeber, the anthropologist, and he wrote this book that I love called Debt: The First 5,000 Years, kind of points this out, where he says that, we often think about creating new things, production of something, as something that's real work, but that the service work is not real work. But he says, really, if you think about it, you only have to make a glass or make a cup once, but it has to be washed thousands and thousands of times, and that's really where the real work is. I'm curious your perspective on the nature of service work and the dignity of it.
Yeah, excellent. So since the very beginning of forming Asheville Food and Beverage United, a driving factor for me has been how many times I've heard people say, well, if you don't like it, then get a better job. And that's just infuriating because how dare you? We work really hard. Service work is really hard. It's physically demanding. It's emotionally stressful, and has been historically completely undervalued. And I feel like, especially like servers, like front of the house, the tipped workers and stuff, I feel like that really goes way back to Jim Crow era, when that's when the tipped culture started, and that was a way for employers to employ black workers and not have to pay them, so that's where those laws really originated. And I feel like, and then, there was a time where it was like, well, it was the only kind of job that a single mother could get, or, a divorced woman. Oh, well, she's just going to have to go wait tables. And that stigma has just been attached, and I feel like that really changed during the pandemic, because suddenly we weren't there to serve people, and people really started to miss us and understand that we do provide a value. And not only did customers, I feel like, start to appreciate us more, but our bosses did too. Because I know during the pandemic, I was working at a restaurant, and we had to cut way down on staffing, and one of the owners actually stepped in and started serving tables and helping out in the kitchen, and she was shocked because she'd never done that in her life before. And since then, she really appreciated what the front of the house especially was going through. And I've seen that shift in a lot of employers, thankfully, and in a lot of customers. They have a sense of what they were missing, I guess, whenever we couldn't provide them that service. So it hasn't maybe completely shifted, but I am optimistic that it is shifting, and that people are starting to recognize that service work is real work, and that all workers, if you put in a full week's worth of work, you should be able to live on that, because you've contributed to society and filled a need there. So why shouldn't you be able to live just like everybody else?
Yeah, exactly. In the second part of this episode, we are doing a 2-part episode for the listeners here. Well, we're going to get into a lot more about what exactly Asheville Food and Beverage United is, what your goals are, and how you guys are going about that. But with the last few minutes we've got here, I am curious how you've seen things change so far since the pandemic. Obviously, that was a pretty disruptive event. I guess, how has service work changed for the people, for yourself and for the people that you are connected with since then?
Well, I would say there's a few things. The first thing that popped to my mind was the old phrase, the customer is always right. That changed during the pandemic. Customers started behaving very badly, the ones who were coming out to eat and stuff. And I feel like a lot of owners, and I know most service workers, have shifted our mentality to, no, the customer is not always right, and we're allowed to take up for ourselves and maintain our dignity at work. So I feel like that's been a major shift. I'm not saying we're not trying to be nice and, congenial and stuff, but if people mistreat us, we're allowed to stand up for ourselves now. And I feel like more people feel empowered to do so and not put up with it. So that's been a huge transformation since the pandemic. And then also, I would say, the way that people work has changed, because there was a staffing shortage, because a lot of people either left the area or left the industry altogether, got educations that allowed them to, transfer to a different industry. So we did lose a lot of workers in this industry, and we had to start figuring out ways to streamline our work. So I feel like a lot of just the day-to-day logistics of how service workers do their jobs has changed a lot. There's been a lot of cut down on wasteful things, like over packaging, or just providing more stuff than you really need to. I was trying to come up with a concrete example of that, but there's been a lot of cost saving measures and work saving measures, and just things that make your life a little easier for less staff. So I feel like that's been a big improvement for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the customer is always right motto, and we all know that line, but what we don't know is actually the full phrase where it originates. It was originally, in matters of taste, the customer is always right. So it was actually originally meant to be like, hey, if you're selling something that people don't like, they're not going to buy it. and it has kind of morphed into this weird, if you're working with customers, then you have to kowtow to everything they say, and kind of weird, this weird power dynamic thing. And so it's funny that that's not even what the original phrase even meant in the slightest. So this is as I said, this is a 2-part episode. Please tune in back next week here, same time here on Biz Radio US, to get to listen to the second half, where we're going to really deep dive into Asheville Food and Beverage United with Jen Hampton here. And make sure to subscribe on YouTube now. We are now video on YouTube, but also to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Buzzsprout, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. And follow us along, and if you can give us a rating or review, that always helps, of course. So tune in next time, and please take care of yourself, and until next time, remember, we are each other. Hey y'all, thanks for watching. I just wanted to quickly inform you about my financial services agency, which operates in the life insurance space. So we help families with debt elimination plans and create tax-favored retirement solutions. We support small businesses, nonprofits, worker-owned co-ops, unions, and social enterprises with employee and member benefits. We offer white glove insurtech services to community banks, credit unions, financial co-ops, and CDFIs. And we provide enduring acceleration and downside capture strategies for all kinds of investors. Check out the link in the video description and enjoy the show.